To the April edition of Gateway Guest Financial and Lifestyle Specialist Interviews. This month's topic is It's Raining Cats and Dogs, the Dollars and Cents of Pet Care. And we're honored to have Dr. James W. Day, a retired veterinarian and friend, join us to share his wisdom and experience. I'm going to give a little bit of a introduction here. Dr. Day is a trusted retired veterinarian in Glendale, Arizona, who dedicated his craft to providing compassionate care for beloved pets. And with a focus on personalized treatment and preventive health, Dr. Day offered a range of veterinary services to ensure the well-being of animals. Dr. Day created a positive atmosphere at Glendale Animal Hospital, making every visit a positive experience for both pets and their owners. And as part of their new retirement chapter, just yesterday, he and his wife Angela moved out of their lovely home and have embarked on a long-term RV adventure and lifestyle.
Wow.
He's using his Starlink internet to join us today, and we're excited to have him and excited for the next steps for him and his wife. So also, before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Again, we're recording this webinar, so we will provide a notification when the recording is available on our website in case you want to review it or point your friends to it. This webinar is intended only for educational purposes and should not be construed as financial, legal, or tax advice. We'll spend about the first 25 minutes on the interview and then about 5 minutes for Q&A. And so until then, though, we'll try to stick with the questions and we'll answer any of those questions at the end. So, Dr. Day, again, welcome.
Good to be with you, Tim.
Let's start out with somebody who's considering getting a pet, and what are some of the things they should be just thinking about in general before they even make that trip to the pet store or the shelter? What are the first things that come to your mind?
Well, of course, having a pet's a joy and bring a lot of happiness into our lives, whether it be a dog or a cat, certainly the most common, but some people enjoy, exotic pets. But I think that where many people don't think it through all the way is it's more than just bringing a dog home or a cat home and buying a bag of food and throwing it on the floor sort of thing. I think that people really need to consider that, find out what kind of care is needed for that particular pet, especially, I don't think it's difficult to own a dog or cat. And with a little bit of planning, people can do great and have a really good experience. If you have exotic pets, often you need to do a lot more research about what their behaviors are like, what their needs are, that sort of thing. But doing a little advanced planning, I know your webinar here is a little bit about the financial side, and that's pretty important because people all of a sudden they find out that they have a pet that has a specific problem or an issue, and then they were totally unprepared.
So it sounds like you need to think about what your own needs and expectations are about that pet. Try to link those to what's realistic as opposed to just something that's cute and furry, right?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I have a daughter who they adopted a bulldog, and I think bulldogs are great dogs. They're wonderful to be around. But as veterinarians, we call them the veterinarian's dream because they had every problem imaginable over their lifespan. And a person who didn't understand that, next thing they know, they're jumping from one problem to another to try to manage that. And so doing a little research, which is certainly a lot easier nowadays, but doing a little research as to what issues that particular animal may have, especially in dogs with respect to breed. Cats in general are overall a lot more healthier. They're not as inbred as purebred dogs are, although there are more pure breeds that people may adopt with cats. But doing a little research beforehand is critical.
Right. Do a little bit of homework up front can make a big difference. Thanks. So, what are some of the pros and cons of adopting from shelters versus, say, buying from a breeder?
Sure. Well, buying from a breeder, you're typically doing that to get a specific, usually a dog, but perhaps a cat. and you're trying to get a dog or cat that looks a certain way or has certain behaviors and things like that, and the cost is generally going to be up there and often in the thousands of dollars. Getting a pet from a shelter, not only may you get a very good pet, but you may also, again, the initial cost may be much lower. Many shelters are going to include in their adoption fee, which often just runs in the few, sometimes 50, $100 or more, few $100s, but you're often going to get that pet's already been neutered, may have had initial vaccines. Some of their initial medical issues may have been handled. And I think it's a great way to go if you're just looking to have a dog or you're looking to have a cat. For instance, getting a pet from a shelter or a rescue can be a terrific way to go. The downside sometimes is those animals may not have had the best start in life. They may carry some chronic issues with them from the shelter, often respiratory illnesses and things. But generally, those are perhaps minor compared to buying a purebred dog. Like I mentioned, the bulldog. Nothing. Love bulldogs. Nothing against them, but they're a breakdown factory. They're going to have many health issues over their life. Whereas, say, a shelter animal, just a mixed breed dog or a basic cat, those animals are actually often healthier as well.
So if you've already made the decision to buy the pet, once it's home, what are some additional financial considerations that they should be thinking of?
Yeah, obviously you have some nominal expenses, food, water bowls, things like that, and you could use, we've actually used our own dishes. Some people might be adverse to that, but true pet lovers really don't get too uptight about that. But getting the animal spayed or neutered, which is a good idea, not just from a standpoint of avoiding unwanted birth, but also generally spayed and neutered animals are actually better behaved. They're often a little easier to train, things like that. But you'll have, if you don't get from a shelter, for instance, you've got that expense. My daughter just adopted, about 8 months ago, 9 months ago, a purebred corgi, and now the expense of having her fixed is coming up. For dogs and cats, there's going to be initial vaccines uh, series, which again usually isn't overly prohibitive for most people. You're going to have those kind of expenses, and then perhaps you're going to need some training, whether it be group training or an individual trainer, or even doing it yourself. But you're going to have some expense probably associated with teaching them the basics to heel on a leash if it's a dog, to sit, stay. I don't know that you train many cats, although I've seen some pretty interesting thing cats do. But generally, cat owners are happy with letting the cats be cats and enjoying that. But those are some of the basic upfront expenses.
And then what about food? Are there there's so much information out there, so many brands and maybe even myths about what pets actually like to eat versus what we think they like to eat. How should owners go about choosing the right nutrition plan and maybe right food to buy?
Yeah, that's one that opens up a can of worms. I think we went for from dogs and cats ate whatever was thrown out to, there were a few basic brands of food, and now there's probably as many different brands of pet food with different formulas. One of my best advice is talk to the vet that you trust, see what they recommend. Not all people agree with that. We often went with good, high quality name brand foods that provided good nutrition. But now there's so many boutique brands. When I was in practice, we found often the boutique brands uh, had several drawbacks. We often could name three or four brands of, say, dog food or cat food that always seemed associated with gastrointestinal disorders or skin problems. And so, talking to your vet and seeing what works. Now, some people have different. Again, this is a can of worms nowadays. There's even refrigerated foods or food that are delivered to your door that are supposed to be made up of different meats and vegetables and things like that. Everyone has an opinion. I'll certainly, in my opinions, probably offend someone if I say why I go with this brand or that. I had several brands of food that I thought if you just wanted to keep it simple and yet you wanted high quality nutrition, there's certainly brands of dogs and cat food out there. In exotic pets, that can be a much more difficult thing, but just asking the vet that you're working with is probably a good starting point.
Okay, yeah, it's gonna be unique. I've heard of even pet owners that will taste their pet's food. They won't give them anything they wouldn't eat themselves. I'm not sure how wise that is, but we,
The problem with doing that is often, I've seen animals that only ate one or two foods that owners cook for them. I always had a, I always disagree with that a little bit. First of all, I'm a little more lazy than that. After working a long day, I don't really want to come home and whip up dinner for my pet. And then secondly, those diets are often unbalanced. In other words, they might cook up some chicken for the dog, but that animal needs other nutrition. That animal needs more than just a few pieces of chicken to have a balanced diet. And I think that's one of the benefits of pre-made foods. Again, there's pros and cons and people will argue about it, but it's really hard to make that really balanced diet that in a lot of ways comes out of a bag or a can or a package nowadays, where all that labor's been done for you.
that's a good point. May not always be fancy and exciting, but help get the nutrition that they need. So, shifting on now to tracking, what are your thoughts on microchipping, GPS collars, and other tracking tools?
Sure. We microchipped animals for probably 30 years, 35 years of my career. I will say this, that the microchip, it's not going to fall off the animal. There's nationwide registries, all the different companies with microchips. They share those databases. Every vet has the scanners. And I will say this, that every single animal that was walked into my door and someone said, "Hey, we found this dog. Could you scan it?" And we found a microchip within 24 hours, almost every one of those animals was able to be returned to its owner with very few exceptions. I have to be honest that I know nowadays technology is evolving and there are, microchip um, um, tracking and things like that. And honestly, I'm not very familiar. The biggest issue with any of those other tracking devices is, as far as I know, they're always on a collar or a harness or something, and there's always a danger of those things falling off. Otherwise, I think those things are remarkable. And nowadays, if you have a dog or a cat for that matter with a GPS tracking and all that, the technology is so good. But honestly, I hadn't dealt with it in practice. But the microchipping is fairly foolproof. It doesn't work if your dog runs away and gets run over by a Mack truck, as we always said. They're not scanning those dogs, but the ones that get sheltered or get to a vet, we always found them back to their home very quickly.
You make a good point. We did chip our dog, but also to make it a little bit easier, put an Apple AirTag on his collar.
Yeah.
And as long as they're walking somewhere near somebody's phone, it's going to get picked up. And but the problem, again, to your point, is one day he came back without his AirTag on his collar,
Yeah.
and we were able to actually locate it because it showed us the house it was in front of. Um, and they brought it in into their house, and they figured somebody might come for it. And so we were able to salvage it and get it back on him. So sounds like, reasonable options. They're not going to harm the dog. Might just make it a lot easier than instead of having to wait for somebody to take the dog in
Yeah.
and get scanned.
Yep.
So shifting more to veterinarian care, uh, what are some of the biggest unexpected veterinary costs or procedures that pet owners may face?
Well, I mean that could be a lot of things. I think a real very common for animals to get wounds, whether they're fighting or scrapping with one another. A lot of dogs in later life have knee injuries, hip problems, things like that, and that can be quite expensive. And probably the number one thing we saw is all the different skin problems, mostly allergy related in dogs, and a lesser extent in cats, but nonetheless they still have problems, and that can be a pretty major expense. And like in our area here in Arizona, a lot of allergy problems that probably accounted for 10 to 15% of my total practice with dealing with allergy related or offshoot related problems, and especially orthopedic problems where later in life knees aren't working or animals blow their knees out. We were always pretty reasonable, but nowadays there's not as many general vets like myself, and so a dog blows out a knee, you're looking $3,000 $5,000 or more, depending on which hospital you go to get that repaired. Some of these arthritis problems, skin problems can require chronic medications, which means you're filling $60, $100 prescriptions every month for that pet. It doesn't happen to everybody, but all those things can pop up, and those are some of the common ones.
Sounds like almost expensive as caring for a human in many
Uh,
ways.
Absolutely.
So, and it's funny that you mentioned allergies, where, Phoenix used to be a haven for people with allergies because of the lack of so much, plant life. But now apparently the tables have turned. Still, it's interesting that even a pet can have allergies like we do.
Yeah, like I said, it probably made up 10 to 15% of our practice treating allergy related problems, other skin problems. In a any given day, it wouldn't be uncommon to see 5, 6 animals out of the 15 to 20 I would see that have those kind of issues.
So when does pet insurance make the most sense? And also maybe when does it not?
I think first of all, I did not deal a lot with pet insurance. There are probably a few vets in town that work directly with the policy, but most of the time the pet insurance is a third party insurance. So the person walks in, they still have to pay that expense to the vet, and then they have to go back and get reimbursement. Now, many of the companies, veterinary pet insurance, Nationwide, others, are very good at reimbursement, but there is that always you have to have that buffer between the time you have to pay the bill and the insurance kicks in. I think if you have a purebred dog, I mentioned bulldog, French bulldogs come to mind. A lot of the Labradors and Goldens have lots of issues. Uh, it might be a good idea to have a policy. I don't know that the policies that cover the preventive care are always worth it. For some people, everyone's budgeting is different, but most of the time, if you have a vet you're working with, they can tell you the cost up front and you can plan for that. The preventative, the general, the getting the vaccines, spaying, neutering, probably best not to insure that. And I don't think it makes as much sense for a non-purebred animal. That's kind of the secret with dogs and cats, especially. If you have a non-purebred dog, you just find a cool-looking dog or cat at the shelter or from a rescue. Those are generally going to be 90% healthier than the purebreds because so many things have been inbred into them. So that's actually another financial tip is that neat looking dog that isn't a particular breed or that interesting looking cat that just is your basic cat. Those are often very healthy pets.
I've seen pet insurance. It can be pretty pricey, a little bit surprising, but so can the vet bill
Yeah.
for major needs, and it is a significant cost that you have to be prepared for when you want to take care of a pet. So, but outside of major expenses, say somebody is buying insurance to help mitigate major financial surprises. What would you say is a rough annual budget somebody might want to think of when bringing a dog or a cat home?
Well, I think there's always that first year, and the first year it'd be easy to add. If you had a new pet, assuming they weren't fixed, you might have a $500 to $1,000 budget with most reasonable vets. I know there again, vets are like other doctors. You can find some. I thought our practice was always very reasonable, and our clients told us so. And I know other practices that it'll really cost you an arm and a leg just for routine stuff. But I'd say 500 to $1,000 for the first year, and then often for a healthy animal, you may be spending only a few $100s on veterinary care over the especially the early years of their lives. And then as they get into the later part of life, animals will have different problems. And again, I think this goes back to the purebred dog issue is that every breed has many peculiarities. And even as a retired vet now, I'll see a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, and I'd say 9.5 out of 10 of those dogs get into a heart failure situation in older life. It's bred in. They have bad valve disease. You see a bulldog, and those dogs have bladder stones, and they have hip problems, they have knee problems, and they have skin problems. And like I said, they're the vet's dream when it comes to financing that new Land Rover. Whereas you take a non-purebred animal, dog or cat, often those animals are very healthy, and it's going to be more random that they're going to have some of these problems that are bred into some of the purebreds.
That's interesting that purebreds could actually pose more health risks because of how they're bred. Um,
Yeah,
Whereas somebody, more of a mixed breed, apparently has more exposure and I guess resistance to ailments that
yeah,
humans may not.
that's kind of the secret from a financial standpoint. Is I've had all sorts of cats over my lifetime, just as pets. I've had all sorts of dogs, and I've had what they used to call the mutt. Now they give them a name and sell them for $3,000. But um, I've had pugs. I had a French. I have a French bulldog. I kind of co-parent her with my daughter now. But I've also had just your basic dog that we found somewhere. And the truth be known is that and just your average cat that isn't a special hybrid breed, they're often very healthy and much less of an expense over time, outside of just the random things that could pop up.
So, about vaccinations, I know that's a part of initially getting a pet, but what would you say are the essential vaccinations versus those that are optional?
Yeah, most dogs would need like a distemper parvo combination vaccine, usually three when they're young adults, adolescent. Cats the same way. Usually will get a distemper respiratory combination vaccine. Rabies for dogs and cats is important. It's also the law to have the rabies vaccine. There are other vaccines that, feline leukemia for cats. If you have more than one cat, you almost always should do the feline leukemia series. Before I would ever adopt a cat, and I think every cat I ever owned, we found them somewhere, or got them from a friend. The very first thing I do is test them for feline leukemia, feline AIDS. As long as they're negative, I would keep them vaccinated with the feline leukemia vaccine and the combo, and they'd be fine. The dogs usually need a regular distemper parvo booster. If you go to doggy daycare or you board your dog a lot in a kennel, what's called the Bordetella parainfluenza vaccines are for just a little extra respiratory protection. They do have influenza vaccines for dogs. Again, kind of depends on if they're in commingled with a lot of other dogs. They have a Lyme disease vaccine. Lyme disease is basically unheard of in Arizona, although I had a client whose dog caught Lyme disease because they went back and vacationed in Maine and the upper Northeast. So that might be essential there. That's probably most of them that I can think of off the top of my head. Uh, and again, usually working with your vet, most vets will be pretty good and tell you what you really need and what you don't. But I know there are some, especially some of the bigger chains, that will try to push every vaccine on every, and that's absolutely not necessary for many. A basic backyard dog needs a distemper parvo vaccine and rabies. You'll probably be pretty safe most of your life.
Hmm. So, as pets age, what would be some common medications they would need to go on, and are there ways to save on those costs?
You know, common again with cats, not a lot of different things unless they develop a specific ailment. Cats are fairly low maintenance animal. I mean, I'm not saying they don't have issues. I had cats with thyroid disorders, kidney disorders, digestive disorders, but most of those medicines aren't too much. A lot of times, food can be, specialty prescription food can manage those. With dogs, arthritis medicine would be fairly common. Allergy medicines would be fairly common as a kind of mainstream sort of thing. Uh, there are, as we all know, there's many different sources from your vet to uh, to online pharmacies and things like that. So there's a lot of competition for medication. It used to be you got everything from the vet, and we certainly sold medications as part. The convenience factor is there. It's hard for your local vet to compete with a nationwide chain, but what we always did is we actually discounted some of the monitoring and follow up care to counterbalance where we couldn't compete dollar for dollar. But there's definitely ways, and I would talk to the vet and say, "What can you do for me? I know I can get this medicine here." Many vets will work with you. Some vets don't care. They charge enough for the service side of it. They're not really interested in prescriptions, but there's definitely a lot of online pharmacies today that people can look at.
There were times when I found it was a better deal to get to medication directly from the vet than from, say, Walgreens. So just asking, like you said, shopping around a little bit can pay off. There's
Yeah.
often discounts out there, kind of like Good RX, but also for pet medications if you just ask.
Yeah. A lot of medications for the long haul require some monitoring, usually exams and blood tests. We often would discount those tests a little bit for our regular clients who used our pharmacy as well. And for those who chose not to, it wasn't a big deal. They could get it wherever, and we just charged the regular going rate, and it all seemed to balance. I think it probably balanced out for people, but I think again, developing a good relationship with your veterinarian is a good starting point. If you find someone you can work with, ask those questions. I think they're generally welcome and can be addressed.
Thank you. So, when is something truly an emergency with a pet versus something that can probably wait until regular office hours?
Sure. Well, we always had a list, and I probably meant to look that up. Obviously, bleeding that doesn't stop, uh, severe trouble breathing that lasts for more than just a few hours. Now, a dog that coughs several times a day or cat that coughs several times a day is not an emergency. And if that goes on for 2 or 3 days, should see the vet. But one that seems to be in respiratory distress would be a problem. Most skin problems aren't an emergency. Most wounds need immediate treatment, especially eye wounds, eye injuries. Getting foreign objects in eyes are common. Uh, in Arizona, getting animals that get into cactus, often they'll try to get the cactus out and make it far worse, and getting the thorns in the mouth and nose and eyes. Those are usually emergencies. Cats that can't urinate is a specific category. If you have a male cat that seems to be getting in the litter box repeatedly, that's generally considered a pretty pressing emergency. Uh, Passing out, just like with a person, having a seizure is not, but if an animal is unresponsive for more than probably 10 to 20 minutes, that would be an emergency. Dog or cat that's in labor, has trouble giving birth, and that's going on for more than 2 hours, that would be an emergency. That's always a tough one. I think where people typically get it wrong is they just Google things, or they don't bother to ask the vet, "Hey, I have a this situation. What do you think?" Uh, Now, again, you call emergency clinic, they're going to tell you everything's an emergency. But if you talk again, have a relationship with your vet, there's usually a pretty good clear cut of when something is. For instance, a dog having diarrhea for a day, probably not an emergency. Probably talk with your vet. A dog that's having bloody diarrhea for 6 to 12 hours, that probably becomes an emergency at that point. So, again, good communication with the vet, not overreacting just off the first thing unless the animal's non responsive or clearly in some kind of distress.
Is there anything people should always have at home for basic pet emergencies?
Most things people have, hydrogen peroxide, if an animal gets a wound, is good first aid. It's not a good thing to keep pouring on a wound for weeks on end. That's good for wound care. Certainly, a few roll bandages, gauzes, so that animal gets a wound, you could stop bleeding, that sort of thing. Band-aids really don't work well on dogs and cats because too much fur doesn't stick well, but some kind of roll gauze, uh, gauze pads, things like that are generally good to have on hand. If people feel comfortable having a good old fashioned mercury rectal thermometer, I guess digital rectal thermometer, often people will call me and, oh, I think my dog's sick. I've taken his temperature. What was it? Well, it was 102. Well, that's a normal temperature for a dog. So knowing that allows us not to overreact and not to get overly concerned when things really aren't abnormal.
Good to know. We'll wrap up with the question of liability. A couple questions there, really. How common would you say are liability issues related to pets, such as dog bites, and what should owners know, basically?
Sure, you are always liable for what your pet does, and certain laws will compound it. So one of the big ones again is, I always say the one thing I can tell you for certain about every animal, goes for people too, is that they're unpredictable. So I said, my dog's good. My dog never bite. Well, that ranks up there with some of the top lies in the world. if your animal is off leash outside of your yard, even if it's in your yard and the yard isn't fenced, you're liable for anything happens. So a dog reacts, bites a child, bites someone, gets off the leash and attacks or bites, you are liable for that. Generally, you're not liable if a person comes inside your home and a dog would bite them or attack them. That's well warranted. I support that. That's good protection. But once your dog is loose or uncontrolled within the fences and household barrier, you can be liable for any and everything the animal does, including attacking a person or other animal. Cats, cats typically don't get into too much mischief, but when people let the cats roam the neighborhood, once that animal leaves your yard, they're fair game. They can be trapped. You can't shoot the animals or poison them, but if someone traps cats that are loose, that's completely up to them. And so some people don't expect um, that liability that they might have find up their animal ends up at a pound. I don't know of too many cases where animals, cats specifically, attack, but certainly dog bites are common. I think the other thing that people need to understand is that actually the most likely to bite dog I ever encountered was probably the Chihuahua, and they're not really causing horrible bodily injury. But what people don't understand is some of the bigger breeds, Rottweilers, Pit Bulls, very nice dogs often, but boy, if they do inflict injuries, it can be catastrophic. And we hear reports of dogs that, especially attack children, they view them as prey and things like that. So people need to be responsible, and there can be very significant liability, even criminal liability for those things.
I think you answered all my questions. That was a great answer
Okay.
regarding that. Just be aware certain breeds may pose greater risks, but use common sense in preventing that by keeping them contained, right?
Right.
And certainly, I would always just over assume, you know, never underestimate the potential for a dog to be unpredictable.
Yep. Yep.
That's helpful.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've only scratched the surface today, but our time is, of course, limited and so much more to know. But online tools appear to be really good. And also, if you're open to us listing your email address, maybe our guests would have, or those who see this later on would have a few questions they could shoot to you. Would that be okay?
Well, that would be acceptable. We're wife and I are traveling nowadays and spending time up in northern Canada and Alaska area, so we don't always have internet. So this shouldn't try to ask an immediate question like my dog is bleeding. Should I go to the vet? They need to call local. But yes, I'd be happy to entertain that.
um, well, great. So I'm going to list that here. Yeah, definitely call your vet first, just in case the days are enjoying their adventure. So, questions that we have from our audience.
You mean me?
That's
That's
right.
you.
That's right. And our future audience, well, they'll have to just ask on their own.
If I had to do it all over again, I would have picked one high quality cat food, and they never would have known anything else existed. As a vet told me that your cats don't see the TV commercials for other brands, they would have never known. But I started off offering a variety of cat food, and I've just set myself up for failure, unfortunately. But that leads me to the question of I've had several pets deal with gastric and intestinal lymphoma, and that's been their demise, unfortunately. And I believe the vet told me that's like the number 2 killer these days in cats. And I just wonder, how does that relate to the overall food supply? And is the high quality food, I mean, do we really know what is high quality food? How much is food related to quality related to lymphoma? Or do
I
we
think
know?
that I think that's a good question. First, I'd just like to comment on what you said about food. I had that argument with people. If you feed your pet multiple different foods, you're going to make a pet that is like a person that, well,
Yep.
I want to get Chick-fil-A tonight and pizza tomorrow and things like that. And we I had my pets, I would pick a good quality food, at least what I believed was a good quality food. I fed it for their entire life. They always ate wonderfully. Rarely had bowel problems, and it was really a simple solution. But a lot of people kind of anthropomorphize. Well, I like to have something different, but like you said it very well, is that if they don't watch the commercials, so if all they get is brand X, they
They don't
will
know
eat
any different.
they will eat it fine. I don't personally. Now, again, I've been retired for a few years, and maybe there's some new research. I don't think the food is as big a deal. I think one of the things that we don't really realize is, when I was a kid, to have a dog or a cat live even to 10 years was almost miraculous. And
Hmm.
I've had cats live to 19, up in their later teens, and they all died of one of the common cat diseases. And I think it's sort of the same is true with people. As we, as many times people would die of a heart attack or something in their 50s or 60s, and now as we live into our 70s and 80s, I'm almost 70. I can still climb ladders and go on long hikes and do things, but as we age, we start to see these things more. So I don't think that nutrition, and there may be
Hmm.
someone out there proving me wrong, but I think if you pick a quality food for your pet, you're probably good. There, as they live into that older age, they're more likely to develop things like lymphoma, or I had pancreatic problems in cats. Did have one with what's called lymphocytic plasmacytic enterocolitis, and all these are just sort of old cat diseases. When they die at 9 or 10, you don't see them, but when they live to 15, 18, I just don't personally believe that. Now, there may be some brand new research that I'm not reading anymore, but I think that when they're living longer, you're more likely to see them. And I don't know that food plays that big a role. And I think that some of the better brands of foods make stuff that's pretty safe bet on most of the fronts. And that's just my opinion. I often fed Hills Foods and Iams Foods, and had pets that lived old, and they always had beautiful coats, and they always were active, and they very rarely had problems until they got quite old.
Okay, fair enough.
I think
The
our
veterinary cost in general, I. And I think it's really sad that there are people out there that can't afford to have the love of a pet. I think that's tragic. And people who put their pets down just because they don't have the money to pay for a surgery, etc. And I'm also very upset about the role that private equity firms buying veterinarian services and offices, which has resulted in increased price. The role
Yeah,
that that has played out there, it just is bothersome to me.
it's yeah, there was, I probably lived through the era, which I'm glad I did, where there were a lot of private practitioners like myself. And even towards the end of my career, I was doing knee surgeries for 15 or $1,800 so people could get it fixed. And they were telling me, yeah, it's 5 or 6 thousand over here and over there. And that's because the private doctor could do things, but the regulatory conditions have changed. And you're right, corporations have come in and probably bought up 80% of the veterinarians now. And the other side of that coin is vets come out of school now with $250,000 in debt, just like MDs and all. And so they have to make a salary to recruit. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. In some ways, I'm glad I'm not part of it. I enjoyed being able to make a nice living, and yet being able to help people who needed things. But you're right, a lot of the corporate buying of practices and things has changed the landscape quite a bit, and it makes it much more financially difficult in some ways.
Yeah. That's all. Thank you for your
that's
time.
real
Glad to be here.
concerns. So we like to finish with one more question. That is, being financial planners, we're always looking forward. So if you could name one thing you hope to live long enough to experience, what would you say that is, Dr. Day?
Well, I retired on July 1st of 2020. On July 2nd, my wife and I drove to Alaska and stayed up there in the back, and it was an amazing experience. And that was kind of our dream, and we're going to repeat it again this summer, except we're going to double that size of the trip. I just like to continue to see interesting places, beautiful places, peaceful places. to be honest, I've been most of the places I really, really want to go, but I'd hope to experience some more of Alaska, and we're going to go there this summer. So I did save my money over time and socked away for a rainy day and didn't wasn't so self-indulgent over my career and ran some side businesses and things that saved up so I can do that. And we're kind of doing that. We've sold the house, as you said, and we're in an RV right now, and we're taking off on a 6-month trip to Alaska. So that's what I hope to do.
Good for you. You're on your way for sure. And few places in nature I hear are greater than the Alaskan wilderness. So enjoy
Pretty
that
amazing. Yes, thank you.
and the wildlife. Maybe you can save a few animals up there while you're out there.
Well, you never know.
Thanks again. And we'll be in touch. And anybody who might ping you for a question, hopefully they can continue to benefit.
Okay.
Have
Fair
a great
enough.
day.
Good to be with you, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.